Well, there is definitely a love story regarding this book. Wasn't that a great segue? So I think we're just gonna, as my wonderful Lady Colin Campbell would say, but I'm just gonna dive right in. This month's book, All Creatures Great and Small. I hope you had a chance to read it. Hopefully, I have the right book this month. There's always that pause where I think, did I read the right book? Because hey, Elise, because that can happen. But anyway, I love context, so I want to do a brief geography lesson and then go over some of the themes and the style of how the book was written, and also talk about the legacy that this author has left with us. And I'd be remiss if I didn't also offer all the television adaptations that have become part of our popular culture. As always, if you want to go ahead and put yourself on mute while I'm talking about this part, and then if you want to put your questions either in the chat, which I'll try to answer, or you can hold till we open it up to discussion, that can work too. Finally, I'd like to also talk about all the other books he's written that you may have some familiarity left. All right, so we're talking about the UK. If we go from like the 30,000 foot view, and you could speak to people who live in the UK, and maybe we're not even sure exactly what that entails. So as I'm to understand, the UK is the island that has England, Wales, and Scotland, and then also Northern Ireland. So in this case, we are dealing with the England and the northern part of England. That's almost where you get to Scotland. That is on the east side. So I think I have all the directions straight. And I know, in addition to being a Francophile, I am a monarchist. Would that be right, Cynthia? Cynthia is, I believe, also a big fan of all things British. So I think I have the geography right, but Cynthia, I'll depend on you. Thumbs up, thumbs down if I get any of this wrong. All right, so you kind of have an idea. The Yorkshire Dales are then tucked into that northeastern part of England that borders on Scotland. We're also dealing with a book that has a lot of terrain involved in it, and the landscape plays a very interesting role in the book. So being that I'm very technical, I have printed out and will show you. Let's see if I can do this right. This is like a topographical area of the Yorkshire Dales. And if you'd like, whoever would like, we need to find a really nice sponsor so we can all do the James Herriot Way walking trail. So let's plan this. I'm going to put Lisa Williams in charge of that, and Cynthia, because you're like world traveler people. And I'll give you the whole thing on the walk. You can go to jamesherriotsway.org or com, whatever. And this guy has put together a 4-day hike. It's 13 miles a day. If you prefer, go ahead, rent a car and just meet us where we'll stay every night. I've got great plans here. And we can walk and talk and or we could do the royal wave as you pass by the walkers, whatever you'd like to do. In that case, I'd be remiss if I didn't say who was with us today. We have the Queen. Hello. And we also have Susan. 2 points if you know who Susan is. That would be her first corgi. There he is. There's Susan with me every day. And actually, Susan, fun fact, all creatures small, our belated queen, all her corgis came from Susan. Somehow down the line are related to Susan. It is my goal to have every corgi lined up on my windowsill, gracing me every morning as the sun rises.
So Susan is the Queen Victoria of corgis, right?
Queen Elizabeth.
No, it was Queen Victoria who had all those descendants, and all the royalty was all related to her all over the place.
Well, I know that. I know that Elizabeth loved her corgis. I didn't realize they went back to Susan. Back to her. Cynthia says no.
No, she doesn't mean it that. No, she doesn't mean it that way. She means that from her, like from Victoria's daughters and sons, all of the hierarchies of the dynasties were fed by
Right. It's an
successors.
analogy.
Oh, they're all married. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
If you want, we can talk about the Habsburg, overbite. We can go there too, or underbite. I'm happy to go there too, because I love all of it.
I
Okay.
love that Habsburg story.
Thank God for Lucy Worsley, right? Okay. Anyway, so that's kind of where we are. So we all know that now. And I'm glad we're all on the, pretty much the same page. We know where this story is taking place because it's super important to the themes of the story. And, the landscape is almost a character. Speaking of characters, I'm going to pop right over there and I'm going to get to the characters. First, I'm going to first talk about Siegfried. He is the vet, right, who hires James Herriot during the Depression. He's a man who never notices or acknowledges any of his inconsistencies. And I love that about him. He never says, I'm sorry, whatever. He just, he's confident, a little forgetful, rather inattentive. I would say that each of the characters in this book kind of are like, they represent, just certain, I don't want to use the word archetype because I kind of cringe with that lately, but they just all have these certain characteristics that I think are kind of fun. But we must know that this book is both novel and creative memoir. So that being said, Siegfried is based on James Herriot, real life mentor, who was also a vet. And we'll get further into that when I get into his biography. But here's just a little kind of, just a little taste of what's to come. Donald Sinclair was the name of this vet who was, the character Siegfried is based on. And in the book, The Real James Herriot, that was written by our author's son, this is what he says about that character. Siegfried is considerably toned down. He was hilarious, a genius, and very chaotic. This is according to an article in the New York Times. Hey, Gloria, didn't see you. All right. Okay. Also, he had much more rough edges than his Siegfried character. Sinclair's real life behavior, I'm quoting now, was much more eccentric. He once discharged a shotgun during a dinner party to let his guests know it was time to leave. I kind of like that. Okay. When asked whether Donald Sinclair was eccentric by the actor who portrayed him in the BBC series, the first one, whose name was Samuel West, he replied, "Oh no, he was mad." So very fun. Okay. Helen, the love interest. So we have this thread throughout the story that there is a love story. Right. Helen is a contrast to every character. She's kind of like the wise oracle at Delphi with like a sense of humor. Right. She represents kind of like the stable, all the females in the book to me are very stable. And she kind of represents that stability. I really like that. Of course, we have the minor, I feel badly using that word, but the minor characters were all the Dales farmers, all the townspeople. We get to really know the personality and the rich people of the earth, kind of like a la my Antonia characters through the interaction that our vet has with all of these throughout his journey. I'd also be remiss if I didn't mention Tricky Woo, the portly Pekingese, very fun and said to be based loosely on a relationship that our author had with one of his clients or patients. There's a lot of interesting themes that run through this book. I'm going to go through a few of them. It's about the mortality of everyday living, which is very central to anyone who lives off the land. What's interesting is that American suburbanites when these books came out, really loved these people of the earth. It gave them a sense of comfort in their TV dinners and drive-throughs and the ease, their dishwashers and things. They really enjoyed this book when it first came out. Our author also deposits through each chapter, which really we're looking at 57 separate episodes that are little stories and vignettes among themselves. Our narrator is always reminding us that times are changing. And we see this because of his comments about the draft horse disappearing from the farms when he was away during, prior to him leaving and coming back. It's this idea that modern technology is replacing the ways of old, the use of traditional medicine, some of which were ineffective, is ending. Rural veterinarian work is shifting to small veterinarian practices, which we're very familiar with. And also what's interesting, he points out that radio, television, and cars are kind of making us all homogeneous. So what gets lost are these older words, accents, and sayings, things like that. There's this idea of trust. We trust the folk ways, like we're more apt to trust the Knackerman, the coroner's report on what happened to our animals after they died, than the new guy on the block, the vet, with his newfangled ways. What balances that is, even though James Herriot has new ways of doing things and introducing them and thinking their work, he has respect for the people, the owners, the farmers, when those folk, and he finds a place for folk medicine and accepting these practices also. There is optimism and nostalgia woven also throughout each of the chapters. In the UK, it is the optimism of the book, which is the reason why it didn't do well when these books first came out over there. However, the optimism for the US market was something we could identify and we enjoyed. More on that later. Finally, the idea of marriage is also an optimistic theme. We see the marriage of Helen and James, and we also see James becoming a part of the fabric of the Yorkshire Dales culture. Like I said earlier, the style is autobiographical, but if you went to look for it and you went to buy it or pick it up from the library, surely you saw it was in the fiction section and not the nonfiction. It's also interesting that our author used a pseudonym when he wrote this book. Why? Because the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons prevented vets from doing advertising. And since the book would have been a form of advertising for his practice, he had to change his name. His real name was Alfred White. Yeah, Alfred White. And I'll tell you why later and why he changed his name to James Herriot. It is said, depending on your source, that 50% of the book is fiction. The rest of it's pretty much real. Although one biographer says that mostly these are recycled stories that he heard elsewhere. The vet's son says that 90% of the stories are based on mostly what his father experienced, and some based on borrowed cases. So basically, it's like how we tell the stories of our own lives, right? The setting, the town of Derby, is fictional, and it's a composite of certain market towns that are near, I believe I'm probably pronouncing this wrong, Thirsk, including Richmond, Laban, Middleham, and also the author said, just a fair chunk of my imagination. He kept people anonymous by renaming them. He had much better luck than Thomas Wolfe did in Look Homeward, Angel. So he could go home again. He stayed home, whereas Thomas Wolfe, that did not work out well. Like I said, Siegfried is based on Donald Sinclair, the vet that was his mentor, and Tristan is based on Donald's younger brother, Brian. Helen is based on his own wife, Joan, and we'll get to that in the biography. What's interesting is his use of time when he writes these stories. Based on the year when he started the work, the stories in the first two books would have taken place early during the Second World War, but in our books, he backs them up to a quieter era before the war. Nonetheless, there is a foreboding every so often we feel the war kind of getting closer and closer and closer as we go through these stories. And our book or books cover a 2-year period. His writing is described as episodic, kind of like a meta experience, because if you're a vet and you're making calls, it would be episodic because your life stops and starts depending on when you're on call, when you have to go, when you can stay, etc. And to show his wife that he was serious about writing when he started writing these books, he would write his stories either sitting before the TV at night or during blocks of time between his calls during the day. Thus, the format, like I said, reflects how the book was created. This can also be a negative. People may not like these stories because it's so many fits and stops and fits and stops. So it just depends on what you enjoy when you read. Herriot said that it was his nervous frustration and constant interruption that actually helps this style. What's positive about it is because he had to interrupt his writing to go to work and work interrupted his writing, it equaled a freshness after every time that he came back to it. Like I said, it's 57 short chapters, most contained, and the overall experience is we're dealing with a vet who is learning his craft. He's learning how to understand people. He is successfully adjusting to the idea of what I learned in school certainly isn't being really applied in my practice. I don't know if the same thing would be of law or of practicing medicine. Maybe this is a universal, but definitely in this book, just because you learned it at school doesn't mean it's going to work in the everyday. I think there is a bit of suspense. Will he or won't he marry our Helen? But with a name like Helen, I don't know, to me, it just was a no-brainer. We were going to get there in the end. It's described as sentimental and fluff or inspirational because we see a man living his best life. This is not the first book of its kind. I have not read the Marlowe stories of Joseph Conrad, but evidently those stories are based on the same idea. We have someone looking back on their life. They can look at it through a much wiser lens and kind of forgive your younger self. Also, this book has been compared to another author I have not read, Sir Walter Scott, in his novel Waverley, which came out in 1814, and George Eliot's books, which I've read. Can't remember a thing about him, but Adam Bede and Silas Marner. The idea of the appeal of these books, where you look back on your younger self and it's pastoral, actually first started in the Renaissance. These types of books of seeing the shepherd in the field or the shepherdess being wooed by the shepherd. This was a really popular style because it provided relief from the filth and the corruptions in the cities that these folks in the Renaissance found themselves living. These fantastic ruralized images also somehow offered some type of emotional release. I don't know, Kathy, you're a therapist. Maybe you could speak to that. Okay. Now I want to talk about our author, Alf Wright. So in 2001, his son, Jim, like I said, published a book called The Real James Herriot, a memoir of my father. And this is what he says. My father was modest, down to earth, a generous man, utterly unchanged by fame. And let me tell you, when these books came out and the TV and film followed, he became worldwide famous person, right? My father was a private individual who bottled up his emotions, which led to a nervous breakdown and electroshock therapy in 1960. So this happened 12 years, 10 to 12 years before this first book is published. So this was a private man who, experienced some stress in his life. What he said about his fame: it doesn't give me any kick at all. It's not my world. I wouldn't be happy there. I wouldn't give up being a vet if I had £1 million. I'm too fond of animals. It's so nice when you run into people who have really found their calling. And what he said about his fame when it came to his clients, quote, if a farmer calls me with a sick animal, he could care less if I were George Bernard Shaw. I love that. And he also said, nothing important has ever happened to me. My life is merely a framework for a series of animal incidents. And he does indeed create a framework for animal incidents. This is how all of his books are presented. His legacy includes a huge, huge tourism industry. Like I mentioned earlier, we could all do the James Herriot Way walking tour. We could go to the museum, The World of James Herriot, in Thirsk in North Yorkshire, England. There is also a museum in that area. The address of 23 Kirkgate, where he practiced in Thirsk, which is Derby in the book, is this museum. And you can go and see some of the sets that were used in All Creatures Great and Small. And I believe these sets are from the series, the 1970s, 80s series. There is a pub in Thirsk that was named the Derby Inn. But then in 2020, because there was a reboot that you may be watching on PBS, it was renamed the Red Bear. The Grand Central Railroad has a stop named after James Herriot. There's also a sculpture of him at a statue, I should say, at the Thirsk race course. And he received his OBE, the Order of the British Empire, in 1979. You may be familiar, if you've been to UK, that there are these little plaques, I hope you can see that show like historic places. So he has 3 in the UK, not just 1. I think that's pretty impressive. Now I want to talk about the TV adaptations because these are incredibly important to popular culture. All Creatures Great and Small ran from 78 to 90. It was based on the first 2 books, and we are reading the first 2 books right here in All Creatures Great and Small. This is 2 books because we have the American version. The 2 books are called in the UK, If Only They Could Talk, which came out in 70, and It Shouldn't Happen to a Vet, which came out in 72. I don't know actors, but if you do, Christopher Timothy played James Herriot and Robert Hardy was Siegfried. Wright was often present on these sets, and he and his wife would hang out with the cast and crew. He was still practicing when this series was happening. So when he would stop off at the set, his car could have been packed with dogs because he was going to and fro, which I think is very fun. In 2011, there was another series, prequels are very popular. So the BBC came out with the Young James Herriot that ran for 1 season. And I'm sure some of you have been watching the BBC Channel 5 version, a Playgrounds production of All Creatures Great and Small reboot. I think they're on their 3rd or their 4th season. here is Herriot's reaction to all these adaptations. He was mixed with pride and incredulity. He just couldn't believe it. He did approve of the scripts, but he didn't want to always be on the set. He liked visiting. When the role in a film was of Donald Sinclair went to Anthony Hopkins, Sinclair was not happy. He did not like that choice. It's important to realize that this title, and we'll learn about the origin of the book title. I'm sorry, I'm having a problem with the camera. All Things Bright and Beautiful is an Anglican hymn. So this is a rabbit hole that I fell down, fell right into it, but was able to call and bring to you just a few bits and bobs about the hymn, because it's so interesting in and of itself. This is sung by many Christian denominations. The words are by a woman, Cecil Frances Alexander, published in her Hymns for Little Children of 1848. The tune was composed by William Henry Monk in 1877. The text is, I would say, it's very, it's universal. To me, it sounds very, Emersonian, very Thoreau-esque, and it's tweaked according to where you live. If you happen to live in Canada, one of the verses will include celebrating the landscape of Canada. If you are, depending on where you live in the world, it's so universal that people have just added their own hymns to it. And I won't sing it, but you know the song. Okay. In 1970, you may remember a really dystopian film series. The first was called Planet of the Apes. So in 1970, the film Beneath the Planet of the Apes features all great creatures, great and small. There is where there is this really weird, scary cult. And I remember the scene. I don't know why I was taken to this movie, but that's a topic for another time, maybe with the gin and tonic. But there I was, at the age of 6 years old, sitting there watching this film. And there is this weird cult, and they all take their hair off, and there's just these pulsating skulls, and it's this weird dystopian cult, and they're worshiping a nuclear bomb, and their hymn is All Creatures Great and Small, but it was put to a very discordant, uncomfortable tune. So that's how much this tune that was written in the 1800s is still influencing not only sung in churches, but here it is. I don't know why. Sorry about that. But there it is on Planet of the Apes. So weird, right? Then, of course, nothing could really enter popular culture in the popular culture canon without Monty Python having something to do with it. So on Monty Python's 1980 album entitled Monty Python's Contractual Obligation album, there is Alexander's text is inverted, and a choir sings in All Things Dull and Ugly. So that's that. I have a confession, moving on, and that is I would not know Yorkshire pudding if it hit me in the face. So I had to look up what it was, and you may all know what it was and have all your great versions, but here is a primer in case you were ignorant like me and you weren't very sure. Pudding to me is a very mysterious word. I'm very suspect. So I had to know what is in it. Evidently, it is like a popover. It's made from eggs, flour, milk, and water. Then I went down another rabbit hole, but I will not report everything I found down the rabbit hole of the recipes and the history of the recipes and the people who made the recipes, etc. So I'll only tell you some brief things. It can be served as part of a first course, a main course, or part of a Sunday traditional roast. There seems to always be some type of gravy involved. And how fun is this? Because the British have the best descriptions of things you eat. It can be served with or filled with foods such as bangers and mash to make it a meal. If you add sausage to your Yorkshire pudding, you have toad in a hole. toad in a hole. These are the best people. Okay. The 18th century cookery writer Hannah Glass was the first to use the term Yorkshire pudding in print. And the first Sunday in February, so we just missed it, in Britain is considered National Yorkshire Pudding Day. I'm sure sponsored by the Yorkshire Pudding Council. And in the US, we have National Yorkshire Pudding Day, the 13th of October. Just thought you need to know that. Okay, so there's that. Now on to the timeline of our author. He was born in 1960, James Alfred White, who was called Alf in England. And then he moved to Glasgow, where and I know I'm pronouncing that wrong, and I apologize. He was an only child. And on further digging, yes, Herriot speaks with a Scottish accent, but make no mistake about it, he was born an Englishman. As a boy, he loved animals right away. He says, I was intrigued by the character and the behavior of these animals. I wanted to spend my life working with them if possible. It was an article he read at the age of 12 in a magazine about veterinarian surgeons that captivated him with the idea that, hey, I can help make animals feel better. Then 2 years later, he went to a lecture at high school where a vet from the Glasgow Veterinary College gave a lecture about being a vet. And he said, that's for me. And that was all there was to it. It took him 6 years to complete his 5-year program. According to the New York Times article that I referred to earlier, quote, he failed many of his classes on the first try. Surgery, pathology, histology, even animal husbandry, which he failed twice. So that just goes to show you, like Churchill said, never, ever, 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 ever give up. Okay. He in 1940, he had his first vet position in Sunderland, working for J.J. McDowell. This was a difficult position because their business depended on a nearby racetrack. From then he thought, maybe rural veterinary practice is for me. And that's where he accepted a position that same year, 1940, at 23 Kirkgate in Thirsk with Sinclair. Now, Sinclair had enlisted in the Royal Air Force and was leaving for training, so he passed the practice on to White while he was gone. That next year, he meets Joan Danbury at a dance. She had lots of admirers, but evidently James was the man for her. They were married at St. Mary's Church there that same year. He also enlisted in the RAF in 42. However, because people don't keep anything private and will dig up dirt on anyone, I found out that after going surgery on an anal fistula in 43, he was deemed unfit to fly because he'd want to sit for long hours on that. So he was discharged as a leading aircraftsman the following November. So they then move on to have their first child, Rosemary, in 1947. She grows up to be a GP, and he becomes a full partner in the Thirst practice in 49. Common knowledge says that he only began writing after his wife encouraged him at age 50, but a little further digging reveals that he had always kept diaries as a child. He wrote for his high school magazine and also in college. Like any scientist, he's kind of flowcharty. So once he decided to become a serious writer in the 1960s, he analyzed books he liked, and those included P.G. Wodehouse and Conan Doyle. He wanted to understand their writing styles and how they worked. From there, quote, he started bombarding publishers with his submissions that were all awful and weren't accepted. Looking back in 1981, he explained in a Sunday Telegraph magazine article, quote, my style was improving, but my subjects were wrong, unquote. So this goes back to write about what you know. Always write about what you know. So he decides to write about what he knows by compiling all these notes he's taking all these years from all his not doctor's appointments, but all his calls to all these farms. So in 72, he publishes It Shouldn't Happen to a Vet. These have very slow sales. And remember how I said he had to go under a pseudonym? Well, he chose the pseudonym of James Herriot, who was a soccer player. He liked the soccer player. And so that soccer player's name was James Herriot. And always, I can't stand when references are made to sports, but there you have it. So I report it to you. So it's Jim Herriot, the soccer player becomes James Herriot, the author, and also becomes our narrator and main character. The sales are slow, but St. Martin's Press over here picks up It Shouldn't Happen to a Vet and decides that we're going to take his first two books and put them together and just call it All Creatures Great and Small. We're going to get rid of that. It had a childish cover. We're going to put on a more sophisticated cover. We're going to make it thicker, and it's going to be a winner. And they were right. Okay. So where does this title originate? We know about the hymn, but how does it end up slapped on the cover of this book in super popular television series? Well, according to the U.S. St. Martin side of things, quote, a British guy in our marketing department thought it up. However, according to a 1976 BBC interview, White says, quote, it was my daughter's title, quote, she thought that one out. So this is what happens when there's a lot of research on someone, it all contradicts. Okay, so 7 books follow with Every Living Thing selling 650 copies in 6 weeks on the US and was on the New York Times bestseller list for 8 months. So if you like numbers, how fun is that? Like I said, Sinclair's the portrayal of Sinclair the Elder as Siegfried did not make Donald Sinclair happy. This is what he said, quote, Alfred, this book is a real test of our friendship. He never called White Alf, as mirrored in the book by Siegfried, always referring to Herriot as James rather than Jim. However, things calmed down and they worked together very well. Brian, the younger brother, just like Tristan in the book, was delighted to be in the book at all and loved all the books. So, of course. In fact, if I could pick anyone who could be my life's inspiration, it would be Tristan, because his like favorite song, I believe today would be Don't Worry, Be Happy. This guy, just always happy. I just love that. All right, so now stay with me. I'm going to digress from this bio just to share with you his all of his books, because it is so impressive, right? Now realize that we have our UK book series, and then we have the US series. And then we also have books for children. And remember what he said earlier about his life being a framework of animal stories. In the UK in 1970, If Only They Could Talk comes out. It Shouldn't Happen to a Vet is published in 72. Let Sleeping Dogs Lie come out in 73. Vets in a Harness, 74. Vets Might Fly, 76. Vets in a Spin, 77. The Lord God Made Them All, 1981. Followed by Every Living Thing, 1992. You see, we have definitely a system. We have a framework. Now in the US, we have All Creatures Great and Small, 72. All Things Bright and Beautiful, 74. All Things Wise and Wonderful, 77. The Lord God Made Them All, 1980. Every Living Thing, 1981. And then going in our framework, James Herriot Dog Stories, 86. James Herriot, You Said It, Cat Stories, 1994. James Herriot Yorkshire Stories, 98. James Herriot Animal Stories, 2015. This is a testament to don't fix it if it ain't broke. With that in mind, let's talk about the titles of the books for children. Moses the Kitten, 1984. Only One Wolf, 1985. The Christmas Day Kitten, 1986. Bonnie's Big Day, 87. Blossom Comes Home, 1988. The Market Square Dog, 1989. Oscar, Cat About Town, 1990. Yes, page 2, but it's only a paragraph. Smudge the Little Lost Lamb, 91. James Herriot, Treasury for Children, 1992. Other books. James Herriot's Yorkshire, 1979. And of course, followed by, you guessed it, James Herriot's Yorkshire Revisited, 1999. Smart guy. Smart guy. Now I'm going to return to his timeline and bring you up to 1977. The guy's popular, right? So he decides to move because they want a little more privacy. So they move 4 miles from where they were, and that's where he ends up living throughout the rest of his life. In 1989 or 90, depending on your source, he retires. He has a practice that lasts roughly 50 years. In 91, unfortunately, he is diagnosed with prostate cancer, and he dies of pancreatic cancer in 1995. He leaves an estate valued for probate to the equivalent of $13 million. Not bad. By 1995, 50 or 60, depending on your source, of his books had been sold. And you can go to PBS right now. If you have the app, you can click on the app, go to All Creatures, and you can binge on the entire latest series. It's all there. Okay, that's everything you ever wanted to know, maybe not know, about James Herriot and the creation of this book. I'd like to open it up now and ask you what you thought of the book. And I also want to know if you saw the series in the 80s, if you saw the reboot, if any of the titles are familiar to you that I've discussed. Who would like to jump in first? I know, don't be shy.
Well, I will.
Okay, please.
I did not see any of the TV or movies. I knew vaguely about it. And I've been to that general area of England, not the specific one, but there was a lot that was sweet, and I loved some of the descriptions of the animals and the farmers and so on. And maybe because I listened to it, and so you have a more immediate experience, I just found some of the scenes to be torture, or some of the incidents, because he just played, there's a certain kind of comedy that's based on making someone so frustrated that they just can't stand it. But there were so many things like that everything was just keyed up to make it the most uncomfortable, the most embarrassing,
Will you give an example?
Okay, like when he went to that dance with the nurse.
Oh, yeah.
And, didn't just get drunk, but, fell down and was covered with mud. And she had turned into a real mess because of being covered with mud and being drunk. And, and then, of course, Helen walks in. Or that dinner with Helen at the fancy restaurant, where he's miserable because of the suit and everything goes wrong. And it just, and then almost all dealings with Siegfried are just, screwed to a fever pitch of frustration that it wasn't dramatic. It was sort of like bad comedy to me.
Like a Keystone Cops almost?
No,
Not like that.
Not that. Not
like the honeymooners? Like one of these?
Yeah, which I can't stand.
Okay.
Me either.
Okay. Gotcha. See, to me, honeymooners are old home week. Yeah. Welcome to my fresh hell. Yeah. Okay. So that is
I thought all
Love
of
the
those things,
perspective. Go ahead.
I
I love
thought all
that.
of those things were learning experiences for him.
In what way?
And that he took something away from it that he gained from it.
Okay, so like little Aesop fables, a moral to every story.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I like
Tricky Woo is still by far and away my favorite stories.
I agree. I mean, to have a pen pal relationship with the Pekingese, just the alliteration of it is so delicious.
Maybe,
Speaking of alliteration, I always love it when he goes to work with the cows and he talks about ruminants, and then he comes home and he talks about ruminating.
Oh, I
When
didn't
he's
pick up on
thinking.
that. Nice,
I didn't catch
nice.
that.
Bravo, bravo. Go ahead, Elise. Go
I
ahead.
was going to say that maybe what Gloria is describing explains why he ended up having a nervous breakdown. Maybe
Yeah,
it really
maybe.
felt that way to him.
Very true. I love that diagnosis. Sure. I mean, if you're always running at this fever pitch, something's got to
Yeah.
give.
Yeah.
Well, but it's also Siegfried. I mean, he's so dependent on this guy and he's so irrational and he's always sure he's right. And, it wouldn't have taken me, more than twice or three times of these reversals to get him to write it down, date it, and sign it, and then show it to him. I mean, it just made me crazy that the guy could just erase what he said the last time.
Interesting.
Well, it wouldn't have made any difference. Siegfried was nuts.
Go ahead,
So
Diane.
maybe
Oh,
maybe
hold
a
on,
Kathy
Elise.
Treebosser type person would tell us that he was in
Emotive.
fight or flight mode all the time.
Well, I want to hear, I think Diana had something to say, and then we'll go to Kathy's response.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I have to compare it to Bill Bryson's Walk in the Woods, and those two books are just about the funniest things that I've ever read, and I enjoyed them extremely. I've rarely laughed so hard as in this book, and I don't see at all the frustration and the exaggeration. I just admired the tone and the atmosphere that he is able to create of austerity of England in the 30s, of people who live such authentic and real lives, and he treats them with such humanity. The way he deals with these animals and with their owners is just totally amazing to me. The generosity that he exhibits in describing them is unique in our days, where people consider themselves the center of the universe, and he doesn't at all. He's so self-deprecating. He doesn't consider himself the most amazing and unique person. Like, when you read something today, that's what people want to focus on, how their role in the universe is central to everybody's existence. And I just love the fact that he's the opposite of that. So that's just my little piece.
Thank you. Thank you. Kathy, did you want to respond to Lisa's diagnosis?
Yeah. It's funny, I had to kind of laugh because I was actually, when you were talking, I was more thinking from a writer's perspective, because I was like, the thing with being a writer, you got to have conflict, or else it doesn't keep people interested, kind of thing. And what I think he did is it's like all or nothing. The beauty of the environment and the kind of the wholesomeness of all the story, and then the intensity of how much difficulty he had. So it's like two extremes kind of thing. And maybe at least you're maybe kind of alluding to the fact that when we live in those extremes, eventually they take a toll. And I think what happened is the role of being a man at that time, the pressure to provide, the pressure to succeed and always achieve. The issue for men is they must always be the best. they can't, if they're going to be, they got to be the best. They got to be the best. And so there's a lot of pressure on this, you can feel, and you can feel this, through the series that he's, and C3, is just the, tough teacher, and he knows he has to learn somewhere. And, he's not obviously, that method of, forcing people to learn through, you got to do it or else kind of thing.
Trial by fire.
Trial by double bind.
Yeah. And that's very common, and especially in that time frame. Now, kind of what Diana said, we've evolved into a different way of doing that, and there are some pluses and minuses to that, but I think that his the character, and it was a representation of his life, was that he was very, very sensitive, and sensitive people, tend to, take and empaths take the world on, and they take it on and they take it on and they take it on. And then sometimes, it just builds up and, they have that moment where, it's too much for them. But so that's my, I also watched the series way back, and, I actually watched it during the pandemic because I was trying to find something lighthearted, and then I listened to the book this time, and I loved listening to it because you could hear the accents, and it was really fun to listen to. And now we're watching the new series. And I like it because I think it's just a refreshing story. I just like the stories. I like the characters. Except the fact that they have adversity, it's
Right.
life's not, and that to me makes it real. And that's what I'm thinking, in terms of why he added that.
Thank you. Cynthia, you were nodding your head prior. Would you like to add something?
Well, I don't know about adding, but I'm with Team Gloria on this. I found it excruciating, the schlemiel and schlemazel kind of thing going on. Siegfried is bad enough, but then add Tristan and Herriot's caught between the two of them. I mean, that pushed my buttons. It really did. And then he gets
Cynthia's triggered.
I'm triggered. It's bad. And then he gets to be locum for the adulterous veterinarian who's laid up in bed. I mean, poor guy.
Yeah, it's making me think of Voltaire's Candide or Don Quixote or something. I mean, I'm starting to, or Confederacy of Dunces. I don't know. There's a lot coming in my head
in a bad world.
Well, I mean, there's the real adversity, the poverty, the cold, the lack of, real remedies. And that I was fine with. I love the way he dealt with that. And I love the way the farmers dealt with that. It's this other adversity that's created by people just being
personalities. That's interesting. That's so interesting. Go ahead, Cindy. Lisa, go ahead and unmute. And
I just want to add that I was so thankful there were no zombies anywhere in it. And I was just happy to watch it for that reason.
I need context.
Oh my
Why are you getting upset? It's like the Kool-Aid man's going to jump through some.
Exactly. I knew I was safe. It was okay to watch.
Are you surrounded by zombies in your life? Because that's another conversation.
Gosh. They keep coming back. They never die.
All these dead cows wandering around the land.
Was anyone, zombies aside, that we're going to put a pin in that one because Lisa, I have questions. But anyway, how did you feel about, the first chapter and you're up to your elbow in giving birth and pulling out a cow's little leg? Yes, Martha, would you like to comment on?
Well, a little bit of, I'll go back and I'll say, yes, I enjoyed the beginning of the book, that, where he was coming into his own and practice. There's a TV show that Michael and I like to watch on Saturday night called Dr. Pole. And he is a rural veterinarian, and sometimes it's his family, it's his son, it's his, other dynamics, but generally he goes out and he's delivering the cows and the pigs and the dogs come into. You watch this, Phyllis? I mean, this is, and that's what the book was reminding me of. I didn't have all the background. I didn't know that they didn't like it in England at first, and they liked it in the United States. But this is kind of like a foreign. I think he's Scandinavian, maybe. Yeah.
Okay.
Dr. Paul. But this, and that part of England, villages. Yet last night I was watching on Tubi because I'd never looked at that station before, and they had this British person describing the villages up in that area that were, and I could picture the whole family up there. And so I don't remember watching the old ones, but I've been watching a little bit of the current. And it's just so slow. And my brother-in-law is from England. He's from wherever. And I can't understand him and I can't understand them. So that's where I go on it.
Okay, that's interesting. I want to just specify the reception in the UK versus in America. The critics say the optimism that some people say is portrayed in the book wasn't well received in the UK because they were still dealing every day with the results of the Second World War all around them. It was a little too candy coated. They weren't ready for it. But in America, we're far away from it. Our buildings weren't destroyed. It wasn't part of the landscape, et cetera. So we could, in our suburbia kind of mentality, we welcomed it. They were nice stories, so it worked. So that was the reason why the optimism also didn't gel. And it could have been because the books were too thin, or because they had, juvenile artwork on the covers. That could have also played into it. But St. Martin's Press had a much better formula for making. They also had a huge marketing push, so they knew what they had madmen, I'm sure, over there telling them exactly how to spin this, right? What else? Phyllis, did you want to say something?
Well, I was going to remind you that I did say that we had bought this book early on, and I read it aloud to Benjamin. We were taking a car trip, and in order to pass the time, I read some of the stories to him aloud in the car.
Nice.
So he liked them. So, some of the more gory parts we didn't read, but things the tricky woo and some of the others. So
what I thought was important about the book that made it less fluff and more serious was, it's all about life and death, and it's about mortality and how important, how precarious living off the land was and is. I kept having flashback to Pioneers and Willa Cather and how rough it was to them. And this was just a Yorkshire kind of take on it. I also thought there was an authenticity, novel or not, about this man's love of the landscape and love of the land, where he would just pull off to the side of the road and literally stop flowers. He would just take in the landscape. I admire that. He's like a wise young guy. Like, he knew enough to stop and say, I'm going to take this in because this is indeed beautiful. And in our fast-paced lives, we can always afford to do that more. There's a type of religious philosophy. It's not it starts with Thea. It's not theology, but it's this idea of loving nature. When I reviewed Emerson's
Transcendentalism.
It's not transcendentalism, but it is based on that movement, or it is inspired. That was inspired by it. I think it's a Thea, something like that.
Philosophy.
I don't know, but it's about not that nature is God, but nature is the sacred thing. Kind of like the all-seeing eye with Emerson. And I felt that just
theocracy, is that a word?
But it's not that. It doesn't
Yeah,
mean
that's
that.
ruled by the religious people.
It's a friend of mine who speaks fluent French. I don't know if maybe there's a French element to it. That's why I won't stick, but I know there's a TH involved, and it's about embracing nature as something sacred, which, even the hymn kind of gets behind, which is, and it's a very universal kind of belief system that, I adore because
You
it's
mean
so.
pantheism?
No, I'm saying no. Maybe I don't know, but I wish I could find it. I feel like I'm failing you, but all of the things that you think.
Pantheism or panentheism, something like that. Where
Pan means all, right? And
Yeah.
theo has to do with God. Like there's an element of,
But I think it's seeing God in nature.
yeah, I'm
Yeah.
going, let's go with God and nature, and there you have it. And that's what I feel is his belief system.
Mhm.
He really sees the beauty, how we are connected to it, as Diana was saying earlier, being a part of the life cycle, as opposed to being the life cycle. It's, I found that beautiful. I also liked how we begin with cows and a cow being born, and we end with a vaccine, which is this TB thing, which is going to help save, not the crops, the herd. And that's, in order to perpetuate life. I thought that was beautiful and represented the idea that, you have to embrace modern technology. It's for the good of the animals. It's for the good of the people that are consuming the milks and the cheeses, etc. And very, very timely, like something's never changed. So I thought it had a certain relevancy in its lessons it could offer us today. And people who don't believe it and people who do, but there was one other thing I wanted to share with you. I had never heard of the term knackerman. This is the man who came to pick up the animals when they had to go to slaughter. So of course, now I will share with you the etymology of knackerman.
Ackerman?
Knackerman, Knackerman. And that's the guy that is like the coroner for the cows, right?
Yeah.
The oldest recorded use of the word knackerman goes back to 1812, meaning one who slaughters older sick horses. And in 1885, which means to kill or castrate. And you know how you say you're tired? I'm knackered out. I'm done. So
Ew.
connection there. Knacker also means harness maker. That goes back to the 1500s and kind of made it like a knacker, like necklace, nape, neck, thinking there's a connection there. Also, knackers were people who provided farmers with help about all things regarding horses, that also include how to get rid of horses that had died. The origin is untrue, but maybe Dr. Poole has the answer, because they say it may be of Scandinavian or Norse origin. The word, I can't pronounce it, but it's Hnakkur. I'm just going to say knacker. And Old Norse means saddle or back of the neck. So there we come up with knackerman in the book, the guy who carts away all the horses and is, knows how to diagnose everything. And I just love a look, because I had to figure out what that was. So I just wanted to share that with you.
Well, he autopsied the horses, didn't he?
Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
He was like the Quincy of the village. Remember?
Right. What do they call that for animals? Necropsy.
Oh, see, there's that kind of nah sound again. I
Yeah.
love the origin of words. And I also got etymology and entomology, like study of bugs and study of words.
Right. I get them mixed up all the time.
Way too close together.
It is. It's too close. I don't like that.
Is there a word for the study of bug words?
Of bug words? An entomologist, entomologist. I don't know. And then there's entomins. And then there's entomins. Now I go
Yeah, that's good.
coffee cake. How did we end up at the coffee cake? And by the way, I looked in my pantry a few days ago. on the top shelf where I never looked. And you know what's up there? Hostess King Dongs, Hostess Ho-Hos, and Twinkies.
And they never, ever go out of date.
And I did not buy these.
They are like cockroaches.
I'm just saying, how'd they get there? I just want to know. And who's eating them? Because they weren't open nicely. There's like a hole, and I'm, anyway.
You have sons, don't you?
This is true.
Well, who's taller than you in the house?
Everyone.
Oh.
The top shelf is the perfect place to hide some, but I digress. Circling back, I had to get to the bottom also of Woodbine cigarettes or Woodbine. I don't know how to pronounce. So Bruce was going to London. So I said, please stop at the duty free and pick me up, some Woodbine cigarettes, because according to the interweb, you can still buy them. But he said the guy looked at him like he was nuts, had no idea what kind of cigarettes he was talking about. So here is an image of Woodbine cigarettes. There's the from the olden days, and it was old
Wild Woodbine.
Yeah, it's a type of flower. And that's what, Tristan was smoking like a chimney. The answer to all of Tristan's problems was, I'm going to go have a cigarette. So that's a key to life right there. Go, Elise, go ahead and unmute. Yeah.
Sorry. When I read that, I thought about Woodbine, Georgia. It's the only other time I've ever heard that name. Think about it, which is just a little, very rural town, not very far north of here. Woodbine. Woodbine.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Woodbine.
On the way to Savannah.
I wonder if it was like a tobacco kind of town.
Go ahead, fall down that hole. You go, girl.
Pardon me, Phyllis?
Fall down that rabbit hole. You'll figure it out.
Here I go. Now, all right. So I'm afraid to ask, but I will. Would you recommend the book? Okay.
I would.
Thank you very much, Lisa. From Wikipedia, pantheism means that God is present in all creation by virtue of his omnipresence, omnipotence. Okay, I'm going with that. And they even say every creature, for every creature. Okay, so then when I think about Jainism, like don't step on a mosquito ever. And I know that I'm completely going to hell. So anyway.
I always forget what that means, Jainism.
Don't touch, don't move, don't do anything, don't kill anything.
I see. Don't breathe.
Yeah, don't just don't.
Wait, what book was that in?
That was
it was
American Pastoral.
Right.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Right? By Philip Ross. So when you're having a good day, just think, you know what? What if I had a daughter like that girl in the book? That would be a challenge, it's tough. But look, we all learned about Jainism. I was completely scarred. So I'll never forget that. Has anyone, I know some of you said you have been watching the film. Could I just see a show of hands who's watching it right now on PBS? And what do you think of it, Elise?
Well, one of my sons actually said, Mom, you should watch it while you're laying there in bed. You got nothing to do but have COVID, which I did. And I was sort of reading the book at the same time. And I felt like I was influenced in my reading of the book because the television series, the current one, is really kind of sweet. All those frustrating and ridiculous things are sweet. So it kind of made me feel that way about the book. But I also felt like his thoughts and feelings were explained so clearly in the book. And on the TV series, he'd go, and there would be a really long, and I had to read the book to figure out what was going on. I said, you knew he was frustrated, Gloria. You knew he was frustrated, but you just didn't quite understand it. But the book made it all clear. So a very interesting juxtaposition.
True, very true. And we haven't spoken about Mrs. Hill, the bookkeeper, who
oh yes,
who in the book is a force to be reckoned. Like I picture her like being like in the judges sitting up on the bench.
Docket, yeah.
hand me those receipts, young man. We're going to have no shoving things in a flower vase accounting here.
There
But
used to be secretaries like that. Like when I first started working, there
Yeah.
were secretaries who just had so much power. They were so organized. And that was
wow.
They
like
ran
a
the
real
joint.
thing.
Yeah.
Wow.
Do you guys remember the executive director for the temple? Her name is like escaping me now. But she was that kind of a person. Oh my gosh, she did, gosh, what was her name? I'll think of it in a second. But yeah, there were women who, they were, secretaries, but they ran the ship. I mean,
Today
they
they'd
were,
be called the COOs, the chief
yeah.
operating officer, right? Right. Then they were the secretary. But wow. Well, I definitely say that the PBS is definitely do we still use the term saccharine? It's definitely a saccharine version of even the series from the 80s. I mean, it's just very pleasing to watch. It just ticks all your boxes, but
Yes, it's lovely. And the animated introduction ends with a dog just wagging his tail. I mean, it just it sets the stage for you to go, oh, it's so cute. And it's not really all so cute in the book, but
right. The book is much more raw, definitely. Well, I thank you I think this discussion has been so enlightening for me, and it just goes to show you, when you discuss a book, it's so good for your brain. It really expands, how other people look at things, and you have all this different takeaway. So I'll be thinking about this all day. And if you happen to be in Jacksonville and you don't have plans yet for Valentine's Day tonight, I suggest you come to San Marco Books and More. I get to do it again. I think I may bring.
Yeah, now that you ripped it all off of us.
Oh yeah, right. I'll attribute.
You got it.
Tribute. All right. Well, from Coco, the very sleeping beauty who says hello, and myself, I wish you all a very happy Valentine's Day or whatever day it is when you
Elise, what's your dog's name? You were playing catch with her before.
Sorry. I hope that wasn't disruptive, but I had to. She's like Tricky Woo, but her name is Schrody after Schrodinger's cat. There's another rabbit hole you can go down.
Oh, so is she there or is she not? I don't know.
That is exactly. We didn't know if she was in the uterus of the mama or not. If a puppy was born, we were going to get a puppy. If not, no puppy. So Schrodinger.
I love it.
Wow.
You're a star, Schrody.
And Martha, your dog didn't make an appearance.
That could be the best moment of the whole meeting.
Thanks a lot, Gloria.
We had good ones, but that's great.
I loved how she was kissing your face.
Oh, she loves me. But she is like the secretary. Okay, she's definitely running things, and I'm definitely scared of her.
Yeah.
Well, I say another treat for Schrody. All right.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Thank you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.